How can someone sleep when everything around them seems to be crumbling? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Imagine facing a storm so violent that even experienced men believe they will die, and yet, seeing someone resting in complete silence, as if nothing were happening. This is a scene that defies human logic and forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. What does this attitude reveal about faith, fear, and trust in God? Night falls on the sea, the sky is overcast, the wind blows with increasing force, and the waves rise like walls against a small boat. Water begins to rush in, chaos ensues, and fear grips their hearts. The disciples are not inexperienced. Many of them grew up on that sea. They know its sudden changes. They know the real danger they face. Even so, panic is inevitable. The boat is tossed from side to side. Death seems imminent. And in the center of it all, Jesus sleeps. He doesn't just rest, but sleeps soundly, oblivious to the noise of the wind and the despair around him. Have you ever experienced something similar? Perhaps not in a boat in the middle of the sea, but in a storm of life, a financial crisis, an unexpected illness, a family conflict, a fear that won't let you breathe peacefully. Situations where everything inside you screams for control, for immediate answers, for an urgent solution. And then comes the feeling that God is silent, as if he were sleeping while you struggle not to sink. This feeling is more common than we imagine, and that's exactly where this story begins to speak to us in a profound way. The Bible doesn't record this episode by chance. Jesus' gesture of sleeping during the storm is not merely a narrative detail. It's a living, silent, powerful teaching. While human fear dominates the disciples, divine trust manifests itself in Jesus' rest. It's not indifference. It's not carelessness. It's not a lack of love. It's something much deeper, something few perceive on first reading. The contrast between the disciples' despair and Jesus' serenity creates a tension that holds our attention and invites us to look beyond the obvious. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. This scene isn't just about a storm at sea, but about the inner storms we face every day. It reveals how Jesus' faith transcends human fear and confronts us with an essential question. In whom do we truly trust when everything seems out of control? Jesus' silence, his peaceful sleep, communicates more than many speeches. It shows us that true faith doesn't begin when the wind stops, but when we learn to rest even while the wind is still blowing. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus demonstrating a profound intimacy with the Father, a trust that doesn't depend on circumstances. Here, that trust is expressed in an almost provocative way. How can someone rest amidst chaos? How is it possible to have peace when the scenario is one of threat and uncertainty? This attitude exposes the chasm between faith that reacts to fear and faith that remains firm despite it. And perhaps that is precisely why this story remains so relevant and so disconcerting. While the disciples struggle to survive, Jesus reveals, without saying a word, a truth that transforms the way we see our own storms. There is something hidden in this gesture, something that goes far beyond a physical miracle. It is a silent invitation to trust, a call to a deeper, more mature faith, more rooted in who God is, and not in what is happening around us. And it is precisely at this point, when the tension reaches its peak and Jesus' silence becomes deafening, that we need to look more closely at this scene and ask, what does this gesture really want to teach us? It is here that the story begins to unfold before us, revealing layers that few perceive at first glance. Perhaps, as you listen to this story, something inside you is already being touched. Because, in some way, we've all been in that boat. We've all felt the wind of uncertainty, the sound of waves crashing against our strength, and the fear of not making it to the other side. And that's why this passage isn't just about Jesus and the disciples, but about us, about the storms we face in silence and the questions we carry in our hearts. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you most so far. Sharing your experience, your feelings, or even your questions can help others who are going through something similar and often can't put it into words. This space isn't just for listening, but for walking together. When you comment, you transform this video into a meeting point where stories intersect and faith is strengthened. And if this message speaks to you, liking the video is a simple yet powerful way to show that this type of content matters, that profound reflections on Jesus, faith, and trust amidst fear need to continue being shared. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who, perhaps right now, are facing their own storms. Subscribing to the channel is also part of this. It's like saying, I want to continue this journey. I want to look more closely at the gestures, silences, and attitudes of Jesus that reveal hidden teachings. Each new subscriber strengthens this community and helps this message reach places we might never reach alone. None of this happens by chance. It's a collective construction, made up of real people with real stories, seeking a deeper and truer faith. And while you participate, comment, like, and subscribe, the story continues to unfold. Because that boat is still in the middle of the sea, the storm hasn't subsided, and Jesus' silence continues to echo in a way that demands attention. There's something more happening there, something that goes far beyond the visible fear and the wind blowing from the outside. And that's exactly what we need to observe now, with even more care, to understand what this scene reveals about the faith that remains firm when everything seems to crumble. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the disciples' fear reveals much more than a simple reaction to danger. Those men were neither weak nor inexperienced. Many of them had spent their entire lives on that sea. They knew the sound of the wind before the storm arrived. They knew how to read the movement of the waves and understand when the situation was beginning to get out of control. Precisely for this reason, their panic carries an even greater weight. If even people accustomed to chaos despair, what does that say about the human limit in the face of the unpredictable? The fear that grips the boat is not an exaggeration, nor a simple lack of faith. It is the legitimate fear of someone who realizes they no longer have control of the situation. It is the moment when all skill, all experience, and all strategy fail simultaneously. And perhaps that is why this scene transcends centuries and remains so relevant. Because at some level we have all been there, doing everything we know how to do, making decisions based on logic, trying to maintain control, until we realize it's not enough. How many times does life put us in this place? A crisis that arrives without warning, a loss that dismantles our emotional structure, an anxiety that grows silently, an uncertainty that steals our sleep. The disciples' fear is not just the fear of dying. It's the fear of losing control of their own story. It's when the mindset trained to solve problems clashes with something bigger than it can manage. And it's at this point that the storm ceases to be external and becomes internal. The interesting thing is that the biblical text doesn't try to soften this reaction. It doesn't romanticize the disciples' faith. On the contrary, it shows ordinary men, with real emotions, shouting, waking Jesus almost in despair, as if to say, "Can't you see what's happening?" This question echoes even today, even when not spoken aloud. How many times, in the midst of pain, does this silent thought arise, "God, don't you care?" This is a hidden truth that few admit, but many feel. And here's a delicate and transformative point. The disciples' fear doesn't make them weak. It makes them human. The problem isn't feeling fear, but the place that fear occupies within us. When fear takes control, it begins to guide decisions, distort perceptions, and create narratives that further fuel panic. Inside that boat, fear creates a lens where everything points to the end, to defeat, to the worst possible outcome. And this doesn't only happen on the high seas, it happens within the mind. This emotional journey is something that spans generations. Today, the storms aren't made of wind and water, but of constant pressure, invisible demands, unrealistic expectations, and silent comparisons. The impact is the same. The heart races, the mind fills with negative scenarios, and the feeling is that we are slowly sinking. Modern fear may not scream like a storm, but it whispers all the time, eroding confidence and draining hope. What makes this scene even more profound is the contrast between the disciples' agitation and Jesus' silence. While they move frantically trying to survive, Jesus remains at rest. Not because he ignores reality, but because he sees something beyond it. Here begins an important revelation. Fear reveals where we place our security. The disciples look at the wind, at the waves, at the water entering the boat. Jesus rests because his point of reference is elsewhere. This confronts us directly. In times of crisis, where does our mind run first? To the problem or to confidence? To control or to surrender? Fear exposes our inner priorities and reveals the inner workings of our faith. Not the faith we profess aloud, but the faith that truly governs our reactions when things get tough. It is at this point that the story ceases to be merely biblical and becomes existential. Perhaps you identify more with the disciples than you'd like to admit. Perhaps you're living through a time when everything seems too unstable to rest, too calm to trust. And that's not a spiritual failure. It's an invitation to transformation. Because before calming the sea, Jesus allows fear to surface. He lets the chaos reveal what's hidden within the heart. And that's part of the journey of maturing faith. There is something powerful in acknowledging one's own fear without running from it. When the disciples wake Jesus, they expose their vulnerability. They have no answers, no solutions, only fear. And, somehow, this acknowledgement opens space for something new. Fear, when faced honestly, can become a turning point, can be the beginning of a change in mindset, of a faith less based on control and more grounded in trust. This scene reminds us that not every storm comes to destroy. Some come to reveal limits, to reveal beliefs, to reveal how much we still try to hold everything together alone. The rocking boat exposes what was hidden beneath the surface of routine. And perhaps that is exactly what many crises do to us today. They bring to light truths we avoided facing, decisions we postponed, internal adjustments we resisted making. While fear screams, something deeper begins to silently take shape. A contrast is being built, a tension that prepares the ground for a higher understanding of faith. Because before any external change, something needs to change inside. And it is in this space, between human fear and the trust that is still being formed, that this story continues to gain ever deeper layers. If this resonates with what you're experiencing or feeling, comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Jesus' silence and sleep in the midst of the storm are not secondary details of the story. They are its heart. Everything there communicates something, including what is left unsaid. In a scenario dominated by noise, wind, water, shouts, fear, Jesus chooses the opposite, rest. And this doesn't happen by chance. Jesus' sleep is not ordinary tiredness, nor indifference to the suffering of others. It is a spiritual gesture laden with meaning, an attitude that reveals such profound trust in the Father that it surpasses any human logic. Sleeping, in that context, is a radical act. It's not passivity, it's a stance. Jesus sleeps because he knows exactly where he is, who he is with, and who governs all things. His silence is not an absence of action, but an expression of security. While the disciples interpret the storm as the ultimate threat, Jesus sees it as something that has no ultimate power. This completely changes the interpretation of the scene. Jesus' rest is a silent declaration of spiritual authority, a hidden truth that is only revealed to those who look beyond immediate fear. There is something profoundly transformative about this. In our modern mindset, sleeping amidst chaos seems irresponsible. We are trained to react, anticipate, control, and decide quickly. Resting sounds like weakness, but Jesus reverses this logic. He shows that when trust is complete, rest becomes possible even in the midst of chaos. This directly confronts our way of dealing with crises. How many bad decisions are born from accelerated fear? How many words are spoken? How many paths are taken simply because we cannot stop? Jesus' silence also teaches something essential about intimacy with God. Those who trust, rest. Those who rest are silent. And those who are silent, listen. The problem is that we often try to hear God without experiencing silence. We want quick answers, clear signs, immediate solutions. But Jesus reveals that there is a dimension of faith that doesn't shout, doesn't explain, doesn't justify itself. It simply rests. And this is only possible when the mind is anchored in something greater than visible circumstances. This gesture changes the entire dynamic of the story. Before any words, before any miracle, Jesus teaches with his body, with his posture, with his attitude. He shows that true peace does not depend on the absence of storms, but on the certainty of being in control. This is the kind of revelation that is not learned merely by hearing, but by observing. It is a lived, embodied, silent faith, a faith that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, because it is founded on a deep relationship with the Father. And here arises an uncomfortable but necessary question. What prevents us from resting? Often, it is not the storm itself, but the need for control. We want to guarantee results, predict outcomes, avoid pain. Jesus' rest exposes this inner tension. He does not deny the reality of the wind and the waves, but neither does he allow them to determine his peace. This reveals a completely different mindset, shaped by a confidence that is not born from the situation, but from identity. Behind the scenes of this scene, a spiritual journey is taking place. The disciples are still learning who Jesus is. They know his miracles, his words, his public gestures. But here they are confronted with something deeper, the way he relates to the Father in silence. Jesus' sleep reveals that his security comes not from strength, nor from experience, nor from immediate reaction, but from a communion so solid that it allows rest even when everything threatens to crumble. This teaching transcends time because it directly touches our reality. We live at a fast pace, where silence is frightening and rest seems like a waste of time. But Jesus points to another logic, another truth. He shows us that there are decisions that only become clear when we learn to stop, that there are answers that don't arise from noise, but from rest, that there are transformations that begin when we let go of trying to control everything. Jesus' silence also reveals something about spiritual maturity. Children scream when they are afraid. Adults learn to breathe deeply. Something similar happens in faith. As trust grows, despair diminishes, not because the problems disappear, but because the frame of reference changes. Jesus' rest is an invitation to this maturity, to this faith that does not collapse at the first threat, but remains firm, even without understanding everything. While the boat continues to be rocked, something invisible is already being established. A deeper foundation is being formed, an understanding that goes beyond the visible miracle. Because before calming the sea, Jesus is revealing who he is in silence. And this prepares the ground for something even more impactful, something that will directly confront how we deal with fear, faith, and control of our own journey. If this idea of resting in the midst of the storm resonated with you, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Jesus' question after calming the storm completely changes the focus of the story. He doesn't begin by talking about the wind. He doesn't comment on the strength of the waves. He doesn't praise the boat's resilience. The first thing he does is look at the disciples and ask, "Why are you so afraid?" This question is not an empty rebuke, nor a cold demand. It is a mirror. Jesus is revealing that the true conflict that night was not in the sea, but within them. The external storm was real, dangerous, and threatening. But what Jesus reveals is something even deeper, the internal storm. The fear that overwhelms the disciples stems not only from the situation, but from how they interpret what is happening. They see the chaos as a sign of abandonment, while Jesus sees the same chaos as part of the journey. This difference in interpretation reveals two distinct levels of faith coexisting in the same boat. When Jesus questions their fear, he is not denying the reality of danger, but confronting the mindset that associates faith with the absence of problems. The mature faith that Jesus reveals there is not one that believes nothing bad will happen, but one that remains steadfast even when everything seems out of control. This is a hidden truth that completely transforms how we deal with crises. It's not about avoiding storms, but about learning to rest while they happen. This contrast is powerful because it shows that faith is not an automatic reaction, but an internal formation. The disciples react to the chaos because they are still learning to trust. Jesus remains firm because his trust is already rooted. He doesn't move with the wind. He doesn't adjust his posture according to the intensity of the threat. His stability comes from a deeper place, from a connection that doesn't depend on circumstances. This reveals an authority that doesn't need to shout, prove, or impose itself. It simply is. How often do we confuse faith with control? We think that trusting God means having everything under control, clear answers, defined paths. But Jesus reveals another logic. He shows that true faith is resting even when we don't understand everything. It's maintaining peace even when decisions seem uncertain. This requires a profound inner transformation, a change of mindset that doesn't happen overnight. It's a silent construction, made of experiences, falls, lessons learned, and encounters with one's own fragility. The impact of Jesus' question resonates far beyond that moment. "Why are you so afraid?" could be asked today, in completely different contexts. Why so much fear of the future? Why so much fear of losing? Why so much fear of making mistakes, of not being able to cope, of not being enough? These questions expose the inner workings of our faith. They reveal where we are placing our security and which voices we are allowing to guide our decisions. Jesus doesn't calm the sea merely to demonstrate power, but to reveal his identity. He shows that peace doesn't come from the absence of problems, but from the right presence. And, more than that, he teaches that inner peace is possible even before external change. This is a revelation that changes everything. Because, if peace depended on the environment, we would always be held hostage by circumstances. But if it is born from trust, then it can exist even in the most unstable moments of the journey. The mature faith that Jesus presents doesn't ignore chaos, but neither does it submit to it. It observes, acknowledges, traverses it, but doesn't allow itself to be defined. This changes how we face our own storms. Instead of simply asking, "How will this end?" we begin to ask, "Who am I becoming while this is happening?" This shift in focus is essential for spiritual and emotional growth. It transforms crises into learning opportunities, fear into awareness, despair into maturity. There is something profoundly liberating in this perspective. When we understand that faith is not the absence of storms, we stop blaming ourselves for feeling fear. The problem is not feeling it but remaining trapped by it. Jesus does not condemn the disciples for being afraid, but invites them to take a step beyond it. He points to a faith that is still being formed, that needs to be strengthened, expanded, deepened. And this only happens when we are confronted with situations that are beyond our control. This scene reveals that Jesus' rest is not an exclusive privilege for him, but an invitation. An invitation to a faith that does not collapse in the face of the unexpected. A faith that learns to take a deep breath when everything gets tough. A faith that understands that not every answer comes immediately, but that God's presence remains constant. This understanding changes the way we walk, how we choose, how we react. It generates a real impact on how we live the journey. While the disciples try to process all of this, something begins to rearrange itself within them. The storm is no longer just an external event, but an internal turning point. A watershed moment between faith that reacts and faith that rests. And this process doesn't end there. It continues to unfold, layer by layer, revealing that following Jesus is often about learning to trust when logic dictates fear. If this idea of faith beyond fear resonated with you, comment below, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the true power of this storm lies not only in what happened on that sea, but in what it continues to teach us about our faith today. At some point in life, almost all of us do the same thing the disciples did. We seek answers when, in fact, Jesus' invitation is to trust. We want clear explanations, quick solutions, visible guarantees. But the faith that Jesus reveals in that scene is not born from explanation, it is born from intimacy. And intimacy is not built in despair, but in perseverance. Learning to sleep spiritually amidst the storms doesn't mean denying the pain, pretending everything is all right, or becoming indifferent to what's happening. It means developing such deep trust that the heart doesn't collapse in the face of the unexpected. It's a process of inner transformation that changes how we react, how we think, and how we make decisions when everything seems unstable. Sleeping, in this sense, is resting the soul even when the mind is still surrounded by questions. The problem is that we've been taught to believe that strong faith is one that never wavers. But Jesus shows something different. He doesn't condemn the existence of storms, nor does he ignore human fear. What he confronts is the idea that fear needs to govern our choices. When we desperately seek answers, we are often trying to regain control, not strengthen our confidence. And this is a sensitive point in the spiritual journey, discerning when our search is for God and when it is merely for emotional security. This storm teaches us that spiritual maturity is not the absence of emotion, but balance amidst it. Faith that transcends fear does not eliminate feelings, but prevents them from defining our identity and our destiny. How many decisions are made in the heat of anxiety and later generate regret? How many paths are chosen simply to escape immediate pain, without considering the long-term impact? Jesus' spiritual rest points to a different, deeper, more conscious mindset. There's a hidden truth in this story that often goes unnoticed. Jesus was in the boat the whole time. His presence was never in doubt, but the disciples' perception was. And this happens to us more often than we like to admit. Amidst life's pressures, We lose awareness of God's presence and begin to act as if we were alone. The storm doesn't change who is with us, but it reveals how attentive we are to it. To sleep spiritually amidst the storms is a sign of intimacy built over time. It's not something improvised in the midst of chaos. Jesus rested because he already lived in constant communion with the Father. His trust was not a momentary effort, but the result of a solid relationship. This teaches us that the faith that sustains us in difficult times is cultivated in ordinary days, behind the scenes of routine, in the silent choices that no one sees. This application completely changes the way we view our crises. Instead of simply asking, "How do I get out of this?" we begin to ask, "What is God forming in me as I go through this?" This shift in perspective transforms the storm into a school, fear into a tool for growth, pain into a space for maturation. Not because suffering is desirable, but because it reveals inner layers that might never be touched otherwise. Faith beyond fear invites us to slow down when everything demands haste, to be silent when everything requires reaction, to wait when everything seems urgent. This goes against the logic of the world, but it is aligned with the logic of the kingdom. Jesus did not rush to control. He remained at rest. And this rest did not delay the miracle. It prepared the hearts of the disciples to understand it. Often, we want external change without allowing internal change to happen first. This learning journey doesn't happen all at once. It's built in layers, revelation after revelation. Each storm leaves a mark, a lesson, a new awareness. Little by little, faith ceases to be mere belief and becomes a stance. It ceases to be discourse and becomes presence. It ceases to be an emotional reaction and transforms into mature confidence. And this impacts all areas of life: relationships, decisions, purpose, vision for the future. When we learn to rest spiritually, we begin to realize that not every storm needs to be fought. Some need to be crossed. Not all silence is absence. Sometimes it is care. Not all waiting is delay. Often it is preparation. Jesus sleeping in the boat teaches us that true peace does not depend on the setting, but on the depth of our connection with God. This is a revelation that changes the way we walk, even when the path seems uncertain. And as this understanding forms within us, something begins to change in the way we face fear. It no longer has the same power. It still appears, but it doesn't govern. It still whispers, but it doesn't decide. Because faith that learns to rest begins to see beyond the present moment. It understands that there is a greater purpose at play, even when it's not possible to see it clearly. This storm, then, ceases to be merely a distant episode from the Bible and becomes a mirror of our own journey. A silent invitation to trust more, control less, and allow God to form in us a faith that does not depend on the emotions of the moment, but on the certainty of who He is. And it is at this point, when the application becomes personal and the reflection begins to touch the heart more deeply, that this story continues to unfold, revealing even more than it seemed at first glance. If this resonates with your reality today, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when the storm finally ceases, something far more impactful remains. The wind stops, the sea calms, the immediate danger disappears, but Jesus doesn't end the scene with celebration or relief. He leaves a question hanging in the air. A simple, direct, silently powerful question that transcends time and reaches us with the same force. Why so much fear? This question doesn't seek a quick answer. It provokes an internal confrontation. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of that moment. The visible miracle was the sea obeying. But the real impact happened within the disciples. They saw something they had never seen before, not only about Jesus' power, but about their own faith. The silence after the storm is full of meaning. It is not an empty silence. It is an open space for reflection, for adjusting mindsets, for revelations that do not arise in noise. Jesus not only calmed the external chaos, He exposed the internal chaos and invited the disciples to look at it honestly. This silent invitation is what makes this story unforgettable. Jesus doesn't force an answer, doesn't explain everything, doesn't close the question. He lets the question echo because He knows that some truths are only revealed with time. The impact of this question is not in the immediate answer, but in the process it initiates. It is the beginning of a deeper transformation, a change of attitude, a new way of walking the journey of faith. When the wind dies down, the disciples feel not only relieved, but confronted. They realize that the greatest danger that night was not the sea, but how they reacted to it. This changes everything, because, from that moment on, faith ceases to be merely the expectation of a miracle and becomes a relationship, trust, and maturity. Jesus invites them to understand that following him is not about living without storms, but about learning to navigate them with a different mindset. This invitation remains valid today. After the crises pass, after the pain eases, after the answers arrive, the question remains, what did this storm reveal about you? About your decisions, your priorities, your confidence? Often we just want the problem to disappear, but Jesus is more interested in what is being formed within us as we face it. This is a hidden truth that completely changes how we interpret our difficult experiences. Jesus' silence after the miracle also teaches us that not everything needs to be explained. There are times when faith grows not through new information, but through new perceptions. The heart needs space to assimilate, to reorganize, to understand the impact of what has been experienced. Jesus' invitation is not for ready-made answers, but for a more conscious, deeper, and more truthful journey. This final moment of the storm reveals the behind-the-scenes aspects of discipleship. Following Jesus is not just about witnessing miracles, but allowing them to confront us. It's about letting each experience reveal something about who we are and who we are becoming. The question that lingers doesn't accuse, but awakens. It calls for spiritual responsibility, maturity, and the building of a faith that doesn't depend solely on favorable circumstances. There is something profoundly human in this scene. Even after witnessing the impossible happen, the disciples are still in process. They are still afraid, still surprised, still need to learn. And that brings relief to those who watch this story today, because it shows that faith is a journey, not a final state. That growing spiritually involves uncomfortable questions, prolonged silences, and moments of inner conflict. Jesus' silent invitation is a call to conscience, to realize that the greatest impact of a miracle is not in what changes outwardly, but in what adjusts within. That true transformation happens when we begin to see our storms as opportunities for growth, and not just as obstacles to be removed. This perspective changes decisions, redefines priorities, and deepens our relationship with God. And while that question continues to echo, something begins to align within us. Faith ceases to be merely an emotional reaction and becomes a daily choice. A choice to trust, to rest, to follow even without understanding everything. The silence that remains after the storm is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a deeper understanding of who Jesus is and who we are before him. This reflection doesn't end here. It remains, it walks with us, it reappears in other moments of fear, in other difficult decisions, on other windy nights. Because Jesus' invitation wasn't just for those disciples, but for everyone who, at some point, finds themselves in the middle of the storm trying to understand what's really at stake. If this question has also been echoing within you, comment below, "This makes sense to me." If you've made it this far, it's because this story resonated with you on some level. Perhaps it didn't provide all the answers, but it sparked reflection, changed how you perceive fear, faith, and life storms. And that's precisely the purpose of this space. To walk together, deeply, without haste, paying closer attention to the gestures, silences, and actions of Jesus that continue to speak to us today. If this content has helped you in any way to see your own journey more clearly, it's worth subscribing to the channel. That way, you can continue to follow this type of reflection, built with calm, connection, and meaning, always seeking to go beyond the surface of the biblical text and bring real-world applications to everyday life. Also, leave a comment saying you made it to the end. You can write something simple like, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end." This feedback creates a bridge between those watching and strengthens the community being formed here. And if, throughout the video, you felt this connection happening, leaving a like is a natural way to show it and help this content reach other people who may be facing their own storms. There's a video over here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this reflection. Click on it and continue reading with me there.